For months now, I've kept my eyes and ears open for any news on the awakening of an ancient beast called Godzilla. With allies of mine called the Slayers of Cursed Predators, I found a massive underground cavern in the ice of the Arctic where we strongly believe a powerful ancient dragon awakened from. But we've yet to discover what exactly it was. Our considerations were that it was either the benevolent, albeit still very dangerous, Godzilla, but equally likely is that it was an ancestor of that very monster called Gojiron, who was far less kind towards humanity. Now, however, I am actively considering that what may have awakened from there is a dragon called the Frigid Shimoragon. Legends date this creature even farther back than Godzilla, and some claim it to be the original dragon, the mother of all which dragons, as now various species, spawned from. I personally would have assumed that with fire-breathing dragons being most common, the original dragon would have been of this family, but I certainly cannot write off so easily the idea that the original dragon was actually an ice beast, like this creature. The Shimoragon is a fairly classically shaped dragon standing on 4 legs with 2 massive wings. It also has icy spikes jutting from its hide, somewhat similar to the Anguirus spike spine. This dragon's ice breath was said to be so powerful that it could be shot into the atmosphere to create colossal blizzards. One legend even states that the Shimoragon fired its frigid beam into the air long enough to create a globe-spanning age of ice in which the entire world was frozen over, and life eventually had to restart with the few creatures and beings that survived. As always, it is difficult to know what legends are true, false, or exaggerated, but regardless, I am now hoping that this creature is still in a state of slumber, if it does indeed exist. Normally, I'd revel in the excitement of seeing a creature such as this in person and studying it, especially considering it was said to be fairly benevolent towards humans. Unfortunately, with the Archon demon Cypheramov having recently come to my world with the ability to infect and overtake any monster she finds, I desperately hope she doesn't find a monster as powerful as the Shimoragon. I think now I'll go back through my prior notes on dragons of similar legendary status and ferocity to try and determine what dragons or beasts Cypheramov may target first to take under her command. I'm very glad that there's enough Godzilla Dragons episodes to make a full compilation out of it. Compilations usually come out when I'm on vacation, and at the moment I'm off on a meditation retreat for a week, totally disconnecting from everything, an event run by Dr. Joe Dispenza, which I'm super excited to be at. But I also knew that I had to start a Godzilla Dragons compilation off with a really cool piece, because I'd say of my turning this into that episodes, the Godzilla Dragon series is probably the best on the channel, in my opinion. Well, My Singing Monsters, maybe got a compilation of that one as well. I don't know, but I really love this series, even though, as I've said many times, a lot of these characters I'm not changing that much. I mean, Shimo here, I basically just added a little bit more color variety, but mostly just threw a couple wings on Shimo. But the other reason that I wanted to make this piece really epic was because I did this drawing the day after I did the big epic Summoner's Beasts Episode 5 Archon Family Meeting drawing, where it's 2 of the Archon demons with their own 2 creatures about to battle it out. And I finished that and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the next level. I mean, the Summoner's Beast series, where Tayron, the narrator of these episodes, is going off and finding his own monsters to use in an essentially massive Pokemon battle against one of the Archon demons. That series already has easily some of the best drawings I've ever done, because I'm doing more multi-character pieces with multiple creatures or a bunch of human characters and a creature or multiple creatures. And so after I did that big epic splash drawing yesterday, I was like, what can I do with one single creature again that I haven't done before that can make this feel, worthy of starting off the Godzilla Dragons compilation? And so I thought, okay, I've done a few drawings of a character in this series shooting a beam like Atomic Breath or something like that. Can I elevate that a little bit more? So with Shimo, I was like, okay, Shimo's breath actually freezes stuff. So what if I have it kind of going across the screen and creating big spikes of ice that will be pointing us up towards the character? And so I really like that idea, and I think I could have sold the movement a little bit better, but I'm pretty happy with the fact that as the beam is going across the screen, for one thing, the ice shards that are farthest away are the biggest, to kind of sell the idea that those ones have had the most time to grow, but then also that the smoke kind of coming off them in behind is trailing off in the direction from where the beam is coming from, and that helps sell the idea that the breath is kind of moving along the ground. I think the only thing I would change from this piece, if I were to go back into it, is to separate Shimo and the ice at the bottom a little bit more, just so we have a bit more empty space, a bit of that purpley background color in between the ice and Shimo, just to make it feel a little bit less cluttered. But that's a pretty small nitpick. I wouldn't say this is my new favorite drawing in this series, but I am definitely very happy to have this as the start of the compilation. I hope you all like how this one turned out, and I did Shimo justice, and I hope you enjoy going back through one of the best series on this channel. Oh, by the way, there will be more Godzilla Dragons coming in the Summoner's Beast storyline fairly soon. So if you're not caught up on that series, there's 5 episodes, I'll link the playlist in the description. But anyway, now the reveal. Over the course of my time studying beasts, monsters, and of course dragons, I've come across many menacing creatures, but few compare to some of the brutes I've found myself observing and researching in my time in the mountains and valleys of Japan. Well, of course, I've already told you about the morphing Chiselbeak and Scorched Blue Breath, who often ravage the Japanese landscape, but even those creatures will think twice before treading too close to some of the dragons we'll discuss today. The first creature is one of the most horrifying dragons I've come across in my travels. Its scent alone will likely be forever burned into my mind. The smogging Hedora is a creature that appears to be made of a slimy black goop, looking somewhat similar to the shambling slime drake, but more opaque and somehow even more vicious looking. These creatures evolve in a somewhat similar way to frogs, but with more stages as they grow. They begin their life near the shores along the Japanese coast as large tadpole-like forms, starting out only about 10 feet long. They grow to around 25 feet before sprouting arms and legs and coming up onto land. They'll then find their way to the nearest active volcano to spend a few weeks breathing in volcanic fumes. This seems to act as a form of nutrients for these creatures to help them grow larger and larger until they sprout their wings and reach what the locals refer to as their perfect form. It strikes me as an odd way to refer to such horrific looking beasts, but my job is to chronicle, not to judge. At full size, these creatures continue to reside near active volcanoes to continue absorbing smoke, and they will viciously attack any creatures that get too close to them or their homes. Like many dragons, these beasts do have projectile attacks, but instead of breathing fire or lightning, they can both spit nauseous gases from their bodies to render foes with weaker constitutions unconscious, or even spit globs of their own body, which sticks to opponents and can significantly hinder movement. It's still unclear what exactly the structure of their bodies is, since as soon as they die, their own flesh seems to dissolve and devour itself. I can't say I'm eager to study these creatures further in person due to their stench and rather unnerving appearance, but I'll be sure to update my notes in the future if other local researchers find out more about the beast's biology. Now, speaking about creatures with the ability to evolve brings me to another beast whose appearance may not be quite as unsettling as the prior dragon, but it's certainly not calming to regard. The monolithic Shin God is often cited as being a deity of death and destruction, and while their alleged godliness is an exaggeration, they are one of the most powerful species of dragons known to humanity today. Like the Hedora, these beasts will emerge from the ocean onto Japanese lands as smaller versions of themselves with no front arms and small nubs where their wings will eventually grow. As they get larger and larger, their arms and wings will grow and their tails stretch to over 100 feet long, which is nearly twice as long as the rest of their bodies. They'll also form what resembles a second mouth on the ends of their tails. And while they haven't shown the ability to consume sustenance from this mouth, they can use it to bite and grab foes in battle, as well as emit a second burst of their most dangerous attack. That attack I refer to, one which they can only use once fully grown, is a beam-like ray of purple flames. They can also breathe a smoky orange flame more similar to common dragons, but once concentrated, this blast changes hue and becomes one of the most deadly projectile attacks I've ever seen from a dragon. It's able to carve through mountains and torch entire forests and villages in an instant. I also heard some stories from locals about how these creatures could shoot those same beams from the dorsal plates on their backs, but if this is an ability they have, it's a much more uncommon one for them to use. Luckily, if the beasts use this concentrated beam too much, they'll then slip into a hibernative state and remain frozen in place until they recover. It's believed that they're resetting their internal temperature, but I've been unable to confirm this as the definitive truth. But one of the worst effects of coming anywhere near where one of these creatures is or has been comes from making physical contact with their blood. As they evolve, they secrete large pools of their own blood, and of course, if an opponent manages to injure them or kill them, they'll obviously bleed as well. But their blood is so toxic that it will kill any wildlife it touches, and if a human or small to mid-sized creature makes contact with the blood, they'll likely not live longer than a few days. Luckily, there are creatures in Japan, such as the mighty Ultra Beast and Bald Fist Swinger, that occasionally deal with the monolithic Shin Gods before they can wreak too much havoc. But even with so few of them living on land today, they still manage yearly to take countless human lives. The next creature may not be quite as formidable as the previous beasts we've discussed, but to be fair, the standard has been set rather high today so far. These beasts are still quite vicious and dangerous in their own right, having a massive range of intriguing skills and abilities. The Mega Beetle Skyhopper is a dragon with many similar traits to bugs, such as the Rhinoceros Beetle. Local legends depict these creatures as the deities of a fabled sea colony, but the connection between water dwellers and a very bug-like creature is admittedly lost on me. These creatures have various forms of defense and attack. Noticeable at a glance is their large drill-like protrusions in place of hands at the ends of their arms. These can be incredibly deadly close-range weapons, but their most deadly attack can be utilized at a distance. Like creatures such as the Nordic Thunder Dragon, Mega Beetles are lightning dragons, but instead of breathing lightning from their mouths, they shoot it from the massive horn on their heads. They have also been seen to absorb lightning from storms through those same horns, likely as a way to recharge themselves for future battles. And while lightning is the more common weapon of choice from these creatures, they also have allegedly shown the ability to spit smaller explosive bursts of flame from their mouths that can be just as deadly an attack. I was not able to witness this in my time regarding one of these creatures, but there were enough confirmed cases from locals that I felt compelled to believe the stories. Along with impressive combat capabilities, these creatures also have many interesting ways of getting around. For one, like many dragons, they can fly, but often they elect to move through the air by leaping with their powerful hind legs. Most uniquely, though, is their ability to drill through the ground at rapid speeds, to escape threats into the earth or to surprise foes from beneath. And these dragons are in fact rare enough that they may have even more skills and abilities than what I've discussed today. I'd like to research them further, but like many of the creatures I've talked about today, they're quite difficult to get close to without losing your life. But regardless, as you can now tell, while they appear to be a fairly simple breed of dragon and insect on the outside, these creatures are one of the most diversely skilled combatants in the draconic animal kingdom. Now the final creature for today is a tricky one to classify because it resembles other species I've studied and can vary quite significantly within its own species. The Orga Titan Claw is a creature who seems able to absorb traits from other dragons and creatures by biting them. One that I was personally able to study had bitten into a monolithic Shin God and been able to escape when its foe went into a state of hibernation from overusing its flames. Within a week, the Titan Claw's hide had shifted in hue and texture to resemble that of the Shin God. This can make it quite difficult to determine if a creature being witnessed is indeed a Titan Claw, but they have a distinguishing feature that makes it fairly clear if they're a part of the species, that being their titanic claws. These beasts have 3-fingered claws so large that it's shocking they can even remain upright. They use these as their primary source of attack, but like so many other of the dragons today, these beasts have a myriad of assault options. Their primary form of ranged attack is a bright yellow cannon of flame that can be shot from not their mouths, but from openings on their shoulder plates. Alternatively, from their mouths, they can spit clumps of green goop that are effective at slowing opponents, similarly to the goop-based attacks from the smogging Hedoran. With all these attack options, these creatures are very adept at rendering their foes dead or at least unconscious, and oftentimes once defeating their prey, they will unhinge their jaws like a snake to swallow their victims whole. Their stomach acids are able to fairly quickly break down matter for digestion, so they can devour prey that's nearly as large as themselves, though they will be significantly slowed for the time that they are digesting. But assault and adaptability are not their only assets in battle. They also have the ability to heal at an incredibly rapid rate. Like the Deathproof Razortail, they can regenerate full limbs if given enough time, making them very difficult to incapacitate for extended periods, and much more difficult to kill. Once more, local legends have something to say about these creatures in that they were magically summoned into existence by warlocks, who made the creature as a way to defeat beasts like the monolithic Shin God. But more likely is that they're a distant off-breed evolution with similar origins to those creatures. Though, to be fair, I have been proven wrong before. A dragon that has long fascinated, and admittedly frightened me, is the monolithic Shin God. It is one of the most lethal and vicious species of dragons in my world, and has ravaged Japan for centuries. There are some dragons in the region that are able to hold their own against it, but as of late I've been quite fascinated rereading legends of individual dragons that have arisen at times to attempt to eradicate these creatures. One of the most famous examples of this is a well-known legend about a beast known as the Aptilian King. This creature was the last of its kind, a species of 60-foot-tall gorilla-like dragons, and it resided on an isolated island until it was found by a mysterious group of beast chroniclers who thought it to be a suitable match to combat the monolithic Shin gods of Japan. It is not stated who these people were in the legends, though in revisiting this tale I now have a suspicion of who this secretive group may have been. Anyhow, the Aptilian King was not quite as physically durable as the Shin God species, but it had far higher intelligence than most dragons, bordering on human-level brain power. The king was taken to Japan and was indeed able to kill half a dozen Shin gods and live, albeit with a few lasting injuries from the battles. One of the described tactics for slaying these creatures was for the king to climb onto the beasts' backs, grabbing hold of their mouths and splitting their jaws open, often holding off the tails of these creatures with their opposable feet as they did this. It allegedly also tore the dorsal plates off the first of these creatures that it killed to use as shielding against the incredibly powerful flames that can be breathed by the Shin God species, seemingly realizing that the beast's own flesh is one of the few substances known to be impervious to their attacks. The Aptilian King was praised as a savior for slaying members of this wretched species, but its reign was not long-lived as eventually another creature arose to challenge it. Now, the way this drawing turned out actually ended up changing the trajectory of this episode a little bit, and that's because I originally didn't plan to do an actual Godzilla dragon for this episode. But after I finished this drawing and had it with this dragon kind of going off to one side, looking like it's heading towards something for a battle, I kind of went, oh, it would be really fun if I did a Godzilla partner piece to this, to have them looking like they're about to clash in a battle. So I did end up going that route, but of course we'll get to the Godzilla dragon next. But for this one, honestly, even though this is definitely the most simple looking dragon of the episode, I think this might actually be my favorite. The combination of the pose, I think, looking really cool. I've used this a few times of a dragon kind of like with its hand down on a mountain as if it's going to fling itself forward. I really like that pose, and I think this, with it sort of coming towards us and sort of going off to the side, is one of my best examples of it. And then just the combination of the rendering on the fur and the brown fur contrasting with the blue sky in the background, I think that looks really nice. And one little note that people may have noticed in my dragon drawings, I'm not sure when exactly this changed, but nowadays I'll do a 3-tone color gradient for the background sky if it's a blue sky, bright sunny day kind of thing. I'll go from white to a light teal sort of blue to a darker blue, where I used to just do a light blue to dark blue, and I think adding that extra level, the white to it, I think that looks really nice. And I'd recommend giving that a try in your own dragon or flying or whatever kind of drawings. Anyway, love this result, hope you all do too. Let's take a look. There is a legendary dragon thought to be the one benevolent member of the monolithic Shin God species. It is referred to as Godzilla, and it is said to lay dormant for centuries at a time in the depths of the ocean and will only arise if Japan is on the brink of destruction. But it is believed that it awoke upon the Reptilian King's arrival because, while being caring towards the people of the land, it is also territorial and unwilling to allow a creature from across the seas to come to its home and flare its might so boisterously. Godzilla is similar in appearance to other monolithic Shin gods, but with a bluer hide and lacking a split lower jaw, as well as lacking the maw at the end of its tail. The blue flames it can breathe are as powerful as that of a normal Shin god, but they appear vibrant blue in nature. It also has a larger standing height at 70 feet tall, but its tail is much shorter than that of the 100-foot-long appendage sported by normal Shin gods. When this creature attacked the Reptilian King, the invading dragon had a much harder time than it had with the other Shin gods. While the Reptilian didn't now have to deal with as mighty a tail, Godzilla's jaw was much stronger than expected, and it nearly bit off the Reptilian's fingers when it tried to split its mouth. Godzilla was also not hindered by a limit on its flame breath, as Shin gods often are, so the battle resulted in the Reptilian receiving severe burns, as it was unable to block every spout shot against it. It did eventually stoop to a tactic of shoving trees into Godzilla's throat to stop the blasts, but this was only ever a temporary solution. Eventually, the Reptilian was forced to retreat, but did so by tearing the flesh of Godzilla's wings so that Japan's protector couldn't fly and follow in the skies. Tales of what came next in their rivalry are varied and inconclusive. Some have said that the Reptilian King was eventually slain by Godzilla, and some say the opposite. But what is commonly accepted as true is that they did work alongside one another on brief occasions to slay even more dangerous threats before their final confrontation. Now, the reason I wasn't going to do a Godzilla dragon in this episode is because I thought it would just be too similar to my monolithic Shin god, my Shin Godzilla dragon from the last episode. But as I said, after I did the Kong dragon, I knew I wanted to do this Godzilla one as a partner piece, and I think that ended up being a great idea. And what I ended up doing to differentiate them more was I started pulling inspiration partway through doing the drawing from other versions of Godzilla that I don't use as reference images as much, like the Heisei era Godzilla and then some of the other ones. So I ended up giving it ears, which I've never drawn on Godzilla before, but it has had in different variations, a slightly different head shape than usual, giving it more rounded dorsal plates on its back, and doing a different sort of texture for its stomach, and giving it a little bit more of a, I don't know, chubby sort of look, I guess. I mean, all Godzillas are pretty chunky looking, but having a bit more of a, almost like a suit texture, making it look a bit more like it could be a person in a suit. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense or comes across, but I do think this ends up looking distinctly different from the monolithic Shin god, obviously still having a lot of similarities, and I wrote them as being sort of part of the same species, but I am very glad I added this into the episode, and I'll show the finished result of it as well as it next to the Kong dragon. A lesser-known legend in regards to the monolithic Shin gods is that of the homunculus dragon known as Gigantoah. This creature was a dragon said to be created by a dark sorcerer who merged elements of different creatures into one in an attempt to create something that could kill Shin gods, Godzilla, and anything else that vexed the sorcerer's masters. You see, this man was said to be part of a cult of lesser royals known as the Nebulous Knights of M. They posed themselves to the people of Japan as saviors who had come to rid their lands of the monsters that threatened them most, simply as a kind gesture towards the people. But in truth, their intentions were to rid Japan of the most dangerous creatures so that their own monsters would be the most powerful around. In turn, they'd then kill off the rulers of Japan and take the land for themselves, reshaping it to suit their own desires. Gigantoah had a myriad of abilities. It could breathe short-ranged flames from its mouth, common to many breeds of dragons. Its more utilized ability, however, was to project a beam of crimson heat from its single eye, which, in some tales, was a blast nearly as powerful as the flames spat by the Shin gods. Its flight speed was also said to rival that of sonic soaring wyverns, and it had nearly unbreakable blades at the ends of its forearms, feet, and tail. Gigantoah was but one of the creatures the sorcerer created in an attempt to slay the Shin gods, and while it was quite mighty, it was only ever able to defeat one or two of these creatures on its own. And, as the Aptilian king had, this creature eventually drew the wrath of Godzilla, who promptly killed Gigantoah. The sorcerer of the Nebulous Knights was able to revive the creature at various times with altered skills, but it was still never strong enough to best Godzilla. Now, choosing who to use for the other drawings of this episode was a little bit tough because, as I said, I wasn't going to do Godzilla for this episode, so adding Godzilla in meant I had to cut somebody out, and who I was going to cut came down to either Gigan or Anguirus. And even though Anguirus is probably my favorite Godzilla monster, although Destroyah is kinda rising up those ranks a little bit, I knew that I had more recently done Anguirus in a Godzilla episode, and it had been a long time since I used Gigan. Plus, I don't think I really loved the one drawing of Gigan I've done on this channel, although funny enough, it was Gigan as a transformer, and that episode is set on this same planet. I do have an idea for how that works out lore-wise, but I didn't want to get into it. I thought it was going to be too complicated for anyone that's not following Multiverse Tales. But anyway, I'm very glad that I ended up using Gigan for this. I love the design. I didn't do anything too complicated with it, just took out some of the more mechanical elements, made it more draconic looking in shape. And I don't really know why I went with a swirling purple storm in behind this creature, but I just kind of wanted to do something a little bit different from anything I've done recently with my dragons. And I know when I did my rebooted version of Storm from X-Men as a dragon, I really loved how it looked having rain coming down and some of it splashing off of the dragon. I also did think about having lightning in behind this one, but pose-wise, composition-wise, couldn't really figure out an angle for it that I liked, so I decided to just keep it with the rain, and I think that ends up working really well. I do think this ends up looking really cool. After many failed attempts to create dragons and monstrosities that could defeat Godzilla, it is said that the sorcerer for the Nebulous Knights was banished from their ranks, but he was still determined to prove his skills. He ended up attempting something incredibly dangerous, acquiring a sample of blood from a deceased monolithic Shin god. This substance is known to be lethal to humans and most animals, but he apparently accepted the risk, losing his life soon after his next creature was made. He used the blood of the Shin god to concoct a new spell, which he cast upon a breed of dire crab that can be found along the shores of Japan. This crab that he cursed then slowly mutated over the course of a few weeks and eventually grew into a 100-foot-tall crimson beast that came to be known as the Titanic God Destroyer. This creature had all the might of a monolithic Shin god and more. It could fire a beam of purple lightning and flames that could decimate anything before it. The single horn that protruded from its head could heat up to lava-like temperatures and pierce through the hide of any creature. It is said that its tail could even detach and attack creatures as though it were its own unique entity, then recombine with the destroyer. So the tale goes, Godzilla had actually had a child, who at the time of the destroyer's rise was roaming the lands of Japan. When the child of Japan's protector came face to face with the titanic destroyer, the young Godzilla was no match, and fell in battle. This accounted for one of the few times Godzilla and the Aptilian King willingly worked alongside one another. Godzilla had an obvious score to settle for the death of his son, and it is assumed that the Aptilian King sensed the Shin God blood coursing through this creature, or even simply recognized its destructive capabilities and fought alongside Godzilla to defeat it. The pair were indeed able to destroy the destroyer, or so it is believed. Its body sank to the depths of the ocean upon being allegedly killed, and no hide was ever found, so some do believe that the beast did not truly see its end that day. Regardless, however, it would have been a miraculous sight for those that witnessed the event and were able to live, as seeing Godzilla and the Aptilian King fight alongside one another would be a marvelous wonder to behold. Now, as I said, Destroyah is kinda becoming one of my favorite Godzilla designs, and I've only used it once before on this channel as well, back when I did my giant mech armor episode out of Godzilla Monsters. And that design I liked enough, but I think I like this one more, although this isn't my favorite drawing of the episode. And there are actually a few things I end up having to tweak that I kinda wish I'd screen recorded the fixes for it, but basically the crop for this one wasn't really working for me. It didn't make the creature feel big enough. As I've talked about when trying to fit dragon's wings into an image, it can actually make a dragon look a lot bigger if the wings are more cropped out. So when I finished this one with the wings completely in the image, it made the dragon look and feel a little bit smaller. So at the end I end up changing the angle of one of his feet a little bit by combining the whole dragon, all the elements of it, and just kind of lasso tooling it and switching the angle of the foot a little bit. But then I also move in some of the background elements so that we can crop the whole thing in a little bit more. And then I think that does end up helping this thing feel a little bit bigger and more monstrous, and like we're looking up at this monolithic beast. Also, I should point out Destroyah is essentially already a dragon. I just made it a sort of different type of dragon. And I did change its lore around a little bit to make it fit into this and help it kind of wrap up the sort of story that was happening here. Godzilla didn't team up with Kong to fight this thing, and it wasn't created by the same aliens that created Gigan. But I wanted to tie the whole story in a little bit together. Hope you all like this last dragon of the episode, and let's take a look. Something has been awakening the most monstrous dragons of my world. Many beasts that I'd read about and thought to possibly have been only exaggerated legends have been clawing their way out of the earth or appearing in the skies, reacquainting the people of my world with their might. Though some are acting differently from how they did in their tales of old. The first creature to reveal itself in the last week was Rodan, the fire beast. It is a dragon whose body may only stand at a relatively common height of 50 feet from foot to beak, but whose wingspan reaches nearly 250 feet wide. In its legends, it is said to be an incredibly destructive monster, the last of a rare species of dragon that were all killed off by the benevolent, but very territorial legendary beast, Godzilla, who I learned about the last time I read up on these beasts of old. Rodan did battle with this protector of Japan, and while it survived its encounters, it was forced to flee from its homelands. It was rumored to have climbed into a volcano and slumbered in the pools of magma within. This was recently proven to be true, as it emerged from a volcano on an island in Mexico, with its already durable hide now being coated in molten rock. I would have thought this would mean massive destruction was imminent in the surrounding villages. But like the other beasts awakened, this creature surprisingly did not attack anyone. While it has killed some beasts and dragons since emerging, it seems to not be doing this out of malice, but simply for food. It almost seems as though it is biding its time, waiting for something. Even as I traveled to the skies near where it soars and observed it myself, the creature made no move against me or my dragon mount. And while I am highly curious about what it is doing now that it's awakened, I must admit that even if I'm not able to find out, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to safely observe such a miraculous and powerful beast. Now, I went really all in on this drawing, and honestly, Rodan isn't even near the top of my list of favorite Godzilla monsters. I don't have anything against him, it's just the design never really stood out to me. I mean, I love the design in the modern version, the more recent movie he showed up in, where he's got like kind of a magma-y glow running through parts of his wings, and I took inspiration from that. But I'm really happy with how this ended up turning out. It almost reminds me a little bit of my Flygon drawing from my second Pokemon Monster Hunter Fusion episode, where I love the result, but I also look at it and I'm a little like, oh my gosh, this guy needs to calm down. He looks really intense. And I originally wasn't sure if I was going to add, like, arms as well as the wings onto Rodan as a dragon, but I realized if I didn't put the arms in, then it was kinda just gonna be basically regular Rodan, because he's already, I mean, he's like a pterodactyl, but he's already kind of dragon-like. So I put the extra arms in and then the tail to change up the design more. But I think the coolest part of this one is the smoke kind of billowing off his back and the flames coming from his mouth and the streaks from his eyes, and then the speed lines, which I've been, or not, I keep calling them speed lines, not speed lines, like the movement lines that are coming off of him, which I've been adding in more of my drawings lately. All of those things together, I think, really help sell some really epic movement in this piece and just make this look really cool. And I hope you're all as hyped about it as I am. Another mythical creature of old that revealed itself not only to be very much real, but also to still be alive despite stories of it dating back centuries, is the Aptilian King. This is a dragon I've also researched before, who is said to be one of the most skilled fighters of any beast that's existed in my world, and it too has recently emerged, soaring over the skies of South America, allegedly having come from somewhere out in the Pacific Ocean. I suppose it is possible that it came from the island it was once said to have lived on, a mysterious place which is perpetually surrounded by a torrential storm, though I went to find that place some time ago and saw no evidence that the creature was still alive. Luckily, the storm surrounding the isle was no problem for me, as I am able to control the weather of my world, so I merely halted the storm to allow myself in, though I did promptly after learn that the storm was a necessary barrier. While I did not find any evidence of the Aptilian King remaining alive, I did find that there were many creatures on the island that did not exist anywhere else in my world, and some were better off stranded in this place. The storm surrounding these lands ensured that the reptant Skullcrawlers did not attempt to escape and scourge the mainland villages. These creatures slumber in the caverns beneath the island, but when they awaken, they take to the skies and attack any living thing in sight. They are a breed of amphitheer, meaning a dragon with 2 wings and no legs. They also seem to be very malicious in nature, often killing their prey slowly when on the hunt. While there don't seem to be any more human residents of this isle, I did find evidence of cave paintings depicting the Aptilian King slaying the Skullcrawlers, suggesting that this ancient king was a protector of the people of these isles before it was taken from its home centuries ago to hunt the monolithic Shin gods of Japan. That very event is one that I've long suspected was enacted by a group that I am now allied with, and so after seeing the Aptilian King once again taking to the skies, I decided to go and ask the Slayers of Cursed Predators if past members of their order were indeed responsible. Now honestly, I did this drawing as almost the warm-up drawing for this episode. Like, I still put a lot into it, making sure it ended up looking really cool, because a bunch of people have suggested that I use the Skullcrawlers from Kong Skull Island, and they also showed up in Godzilla vs. Kong very briefly. People suggested I use them in some regard. And even though this drawing took the least amount of time of all the ones I do in this episode, I honestly think it might actually be my favorite. Like, I really like the slimy sort of texture on it. I was taking some inspiration from my Xenomorph drawings. And I guess I also just really love any creature that's got, like, a skull head. I mean, I think immediately of my T-Rex demon from my 4th episode of Dinosaurs as Demons. I really love that look, and I'm sure I have a few others that I really like. And just the combination of this creature's head, its texture, the sort of purpley to blue sky in the background, contrasting nicely with it. I just think all in, this thing turned out super cool looking. And that's saying something in an episode that I think everything in it turned out really cool. But let's take a look at the finished result. Quick interruption here to say that if you want hard copies of the art from this episode, they will be made available as posters on my Teespring store, where I've also got shirts and sweaters and other things like that. Or if you want hard copies of a ton of my different dragons, including a bunch of my Godzilla monsters as dragons, you might want to pick up a copy of Monsters of the Multiverse, my first ever art book which has hundreds of my best dragon, beast, creature, demon designs in it. That'll be linked in the description as well, but for now, back into more Godzilla. After seeing proof of the Aptilian King's emergence, I headed north to the base of the Slayers of Cursed Predators in the Arctic. They are a group that studies and contains some of the most unusual dragons and beasts of my world, and upon my arrival to the outside of their base, I found that they were dealing with a newly emerged creature themselves. The dragon was a breed of ice wyvern, and somewhat resembled a mole. It has short tendrils emitting from its maw and its back, all of which can emit beams of frigid air that can flash freeze its prey or opponents. It can also shoot even larger and more powerful beams of ice from its mouth to strike foes at a greater distance. While it can stand very low temperatures, as evidenced by where it lives, it is drawn to sources of heat, which the Slayers clearly knew as they were using torches to lure its eyes away from those attempting to prep chains and ropes for its capture. After I assisted them in wrangling the creature, they claimed it was a frigid Vark, and that there were no reports of any of this breed being alive in over 300 years. This one crawled its way up through hundreds of feet of solid ice, and when we went down to investigate from where it had emerged, we found that something much larger must have awakened with it. While the Vark was only around 25 feet in height, the hole it crawled out of looks as though it had contained a dragon at least 7 times that size. Our current assumption is that another beast of the same caliber as the Aptilian King or Rodor must have awakened and tunneled out of the ice, and a frozen Vark had been set free in its escape. I inquired if the Slayers thought there was any chance the creature that had awakened with it was the legendary Godzilla, or perhaps one of its allies or foes from its old tales. Their response was that they hoped it was Godzilla and not one of its ancestors. Now, quick little note that the next drawing is going to be an adaptation of the Godzilla that shows up in Godzilla Minus One, and I went kind of light and vague on the lore a little bit for it because I don't want to spoil anything for people. I know I had to drive an hour to find a theater that was actually showing Godzilla Minus One. It's got a pretty limited release outside of Japan, so I wanted to make sure not to spoil anything for anyone, but technically you could probably infer a few little things in the lore that would be spoilers for the movie, but I highly doubt anything in there would actually ruin or lessen your experience of seeing that movie. But just giving a fair warning there. Anyway, for this guy, the Frost Vark from the new Monarch Legacy of Monsters show, I was super tempted to do Anguirus as a dragon for this episode, because Anguirus is one of my favorite Godzilla monsters and I still haven't done it as a dragon. But I really like the design of this creature, and he almost has a bit of a, icy Anguirus sort of vibe to him anyway. And I knew that if I didn't use the Frost Vark now, I probably never would, because I'm guessing he's not going to end up showing up in anything else in the future. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. It would be really cool if this thing comes back, or a bigger version comes back or something. But I was like, this guy is a really cool design from that new show. I think I gotta go with this. But I essentially just converted the thing into a wyvern. Also, realistically, it would have those spiky things that almost look a little bit pangolin-like all over its body, because, the original version has that. But for my dragon version, I was like, I want a little bit more variety in terms of the textures on this thing. So I added a stomach that was a different texture, added a little bit of fur kind of inspired by polar bears. And as much as I like the original design, I think the variety of textures in mine works a lot better for my art style. The Slayers of Cursed Predators admitted that members of their organization had indeed been the ones back in the day to take the Aptilian king from its home to slay the monolithic Shin gods that frequently scourge the Japanese skies, but also they illuminated me further on the history of both Godzilla and the Shin gods. They claimed that both creatures were descendants of an even more ancient beast called Gojiron. This creature resembled the great dragon Godzilla, but was not a wyvern, and whose blue flames were infinitely more destructive, with a single beam having the power to cause an explosion that could decimate an entire kingdom with one rapid blow. Worse still, this creature did not have the same benevolent nature as Godzilla. Like the monolithic Shin gods descended from it, Gojiron was not a protector of Japan, but a frequent foe to its people. Since the day it emerged from the depths of the ocean, it would kill anything that crossed its path, rarely even eating the creatures and beings it killed, instead biting down on prey and hurling them great distances to their deaths. Even the Slayers of Cursed Predators have not been around long enough to know this creature's exact origins, but some writings suggest that, like the Aptilian king, it was a creature that once lived on a small island near Japan and was territorial and powerful, but only stood at around 20 feet tall. It is believed that some humans that visited that island attempted to kill the creature using a dangerous form of magic that backfired, and instead caused the beast to grow and mutate, and then seek vengeance on the whole species that attempted to do away with it. While humanity tried to kill it on many occasions, there was never any proof that they were completely successful, as it proved very difficult to do lasting damage to. The Slayers now fear that Gojiron may be one of the beasts to awaken, but I personally can't help but maintain a sense of optimism. Even if Gojiron does awaken, perhaps it will do as Rodor has done, and refrain from its past vicious behavior. Perhaps these great dragons have even sensed that in the wider multiverse outside of our world, demons have been sent to invade various dimensions, so maybe these creatures of old are arising to protect our world in case the fight is brought here. I suppose for now, we'll just have to wait and see what other creatures emerge next, and what they will do with their incredible might. Now, if you've watched a bunch of my Godzilla episodes in the past, you probably know that I try to push myself with Godzilla drawings. Something about Godzilla just brings out my desire to get better and try new things. And so with this one, after seeing Godzilla Minus One, I was like, I really want to do a drawing of a version of Godzilla actually shooting his atomic breath. Because even with a bunch of my dragons, I very rarely have them actually breathing fire. So I decided that I wanted to make this Godzilla dragon shooting its atomic breath and make it really, really impactful. And a lot of elements of that I think I was successful with. I love how the actual energy, the actual construction of the beam looks, and I was pulling a lot of inspiration from anime sort of 2D kind of effects. I literally looked up like anime laser beams to get inspiration. Because for a lot of the effects like smoke and fire that I've been using in the last few months, I've been pulling inspiration from more animated kinds of sources, largely inspired by how Arcane, the animated League of Legends show, looks. Because even though my aesthetic isn't super similar to that, I'd say that the characters in that show have a similar level of detail to them as the characters I do, and yet the effects like the energy blasts, smoke, things like that, are all done in a more 2D flat kind of way, and I think that combination looks awesome. So I've been pulling more inspiration for that, and I think it worked out really nicely on this beam. It's fairly simple looking, but I feel like it works so well. Paired with the fact that after the drawing was finished, I added a few extra speed lines like kind of pointing into the character, and even added a little bit of a radial blur to kind of frame us in towards his head more. But the one knock against this drawing in terms of the impact of this beam is the pose of Godzilla. I think it's a cool pose, but to make this beam feel like it was really like a massive, powerful blow, I should have had Godzilla on the ground, kind of braced with his feet like dug into the ground, or if I wanted him in the air, to have it be less of a swooping kind of pose, more like his wings are, for one thing, a bit bigger and bracing him a little bit more, as if this beam is like pushing him back, it's so powerful. Don't get me wrong, I still love how this thing looks, but I think that would have just pushed it over the edge, emphasized that the power of this blow a little bit more. But all in, I still love this one, and I hope you all do too. More and more ancient dragons of legend have been reappearing in my world. The reason for this is still unknown to me, but stranger still is that even the ones told in old tales to be violent and dangerous have been fairly docile towards humans. For the most part, that is. One that I came across recently was a male of the species called the Jinshin Mutoris. These are not quite the same as some of the others to reawaken, as they were known to be a full species in days of old, albeit a very rare species to find, and one that had legendary clashes with the likes of the savior dragon of Japan, Godzilla. These creatures did have the capacity to reproduce in large numbers, but it is said that anytime a female laid a nest of eggs, Godzilla would hunt down the nest and destroy it before the brood could hatch. The tales say it did this to protect the people of Japan from being overrun and wiped out by these creatures. But given how territorial Godzilla was known to be, it would also not surprise me to learn that it simply did this to keep an invasive species of new dragons from spreading in its home territory. What I consider to be one of the most interesting things about the Mutoris species, though, is the difference between the males and the females. The males of this species are smaller, reaching about 36 feet in height, but they also have wings and the ability to fly. The females, on the other hand, do not have wings. They are in fact classified better as drakes, and their full-grown height is generally considered to have been around 50 feet, making them larger than the males, with some other legends stating that they could evolve into an even larger and more lethal state beyond that. They also had the power to emit a concussive disorientation pulse from their mouths, in place of a flame or other type of breath attacks common amongst dragons. This pulse would make any human or most creatures impacted by it dizzy and confused for a few minutes, often giving the Mutoris plenty of time to approach and slay their next meal. Thus far, I have only seen a male emerge, but if a female does rear its head in the modern day as well, tracking it to a potential new nest may be useful in discovering if the great dragon Godzilla has also awakened. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of flip-flopped a bunch with this episode in terms of how I thought it turned out, but this drawing was actually the last drawing that I did for the episode, and I was like, okay, I really have to crush it with this one because I need to have one drawing that I really love in this episode. And funny enough, doing this one and it turning out pretty well helped me go, okay, wait, actually, the other drawings in this episode are actually pretty cool too. And now I stepped away from it for a little bit and came back again, and now I look at all the drawings and I'm like, I think this drawing's only my third favorite, so I actually do really like a bunch of the stuff in this episode, and I think this one turns out pretty cool. I probably could have leaned more into a dragon aesthetic. I mean, this almost looks like it could just be my take on MUTO, but I mean, that's just a recurring thing in this series because I'm turning a lot of characters that are basically already dragons into dragons. A lot of these don't have tons of change-ups besides them just being in my art style. Also, just to point out, I do know that the two reference images that I used, I'm pretty sure both of them were of the female MUTO, and the drawing I did is of the male MUTO, which you may have guessed from the lore because it has wings. But surprisingly, there weren't a ton of good reference images that I could use as, like, big images to have on screen as my reference for this. A lot of the footage of the MUTOs is very dark and obscured, so I just took what I could get with those reference images. But yeah, overall, I'm super happy with this one, but now looking back, I'm like, I think the next two drawings are even better. But let's see how this one finished up. Now, the last time I was learning about these mythic dragons, a group I've worked with on various occasions called the Slayers of Cursed Predators informed me that the protector dragon Godzilla was a descendant of an even more powerful and lethal dragon called Gojiron, who was not a savior of the people but a malicious slaughterer of them. Eventually, it was believed to have been killed for good in a collective effort by the people of Japan, but many also feared that it could regenerate and come back to life and cause destruction once again. So, a clan of ancient sorcerers decided to try and make a deterrent. A group referring to themselves as the Apex Warlocks took a broken piece of one of Gojiron's dorsal fins and spent months channeling the most powerful magic they could muster into it to try and create a dragon of equal power that they could control. This was a similar endeavor to what would be taken on many years later by a more greedy group called the Nebulous Knights of M when they created the beast known as Gigantua. But while that creature was a homunculus blend of many creatures, the beast that the Apex Warlords made heavily resembled Gojira, but with a silver hide and lifeless crimson eyes. When it did finally stir to life, it seemed at first to be exactly what the Warlocks had hoped for. It would obliterate any dragon that threatened the people of their kingdom. But the more it fought and the more it destroyed, the more it seemed eager to cause destruction. The beast eventually seemed to take on the very demeanor of the monster that it had been spawned from, and began causing just as much devastation as Gojira had. While nothing is certain about how it was finally defeated, some say that when all hope seemed lost, Japan saw the very first emergence of Gojira, descended from Gojira but a savior to the people. It's said that other weaker dragons of Japan rallied with it to aid it in defeating this man-made armored Gojira monster. On top of that, it's said that to this day still, the most expensive armors one can find in Japan are made from the very hide of this ancient beast. And while the odds of this admittedly seem quite slim, it wouldn't surprise me in the least to learn that someone I know has ancestors who made some of these very rare armors. Now with Mecha Godzilla here, I did actually consider making it an actual mechanical dragon and figuring out some way to fit that in with the lore. I mean, in this same universe, we have my Godzilla Monsters as Transformers episodes, so I probably could have tied it in with that somehow if I wanted to, but doing this drawing made me think back to the second ever episode of this series, which was Avengers Villains as Dragons, where I did Ultron as a sort of albino version of my Iron Man dragon, and neither of those were mechanical, and I was like, I think I want to go with this sort of route instead, and I am happy with that. A mech dragon probably also would have taken significantly more time, and this drawing already took like 5 hours. But the other main thing that I wanted to do with this one is what I sort of felt like I failed to do with my Godzilla Minus One dragon drawing from the last episode. I mean, I love how that drawing turned out, and I probably still like that drawing better than this one, but I mentioned in that drawing that I wanted him to have a really impactful atomic breath image where like you could really feel the oomph of it, and the only thing that made it fail in that regard is that the Godzilla Minus One dragon's pose was a little bit too swoopy, so it didn't feel like the beam was actually an intense beam that was blowing his body back a little bit. And so the things I said in that is I would have wanted to have him standing on the ground, bracing himself better, head leaned forward and wings up to kind of brace him more. So I did all of that in this drawing with our Mecha Godzilla version. And funny enough, I still think the other one has a little bit more impact to it, a bit more punch, but I do think pose-wise this works better and makes it look like the beam is more of a massive force being shot out of this dragon. So again, think I still like the Godzilla Minus One dragon a bit better, but I'm very happy that I pulled off the pose and combo of the pose and atomic breath, or whatever Mecha Godzilla's version of atomic breath is called, in this drawing. Another of the dragons I've spotted roaming my world, once thought to be myth, is the Anguirus spike spine. It's a 40-foot tall wyvern with a hide so durable it's said that only Gojira, or a beast of near equal might, could penetrate it. This creature's legends have it stated as both a friend and foe to Gojira. The first time it came into the Savior Dragon's territory, they clashed, and the spike spine nearly lost its life, with Gojira practically biting clean through its neck. But later tales claim that it aided Gojira and even assisted the Aptilian King, another friend and foe of the Savior of Japan, in defeating other vicious threats to Japan and the world. This creature has heavily armored plating running down its back. That armor is also covered in spikes, and is the creature's main shield and weapon. It will launch itself backwards at foes with the intent to impale them on its spikes, something that would be lethal to most normal creatures it came up against. That was far from its only method of attack, though. It also had, or should I say has, given the fact that it has returned, very sharp teeth and a forceful bite, along with a sonic blast that it can project from its mouth that has enough force to flatten any trees within 50 feet of it. It is also said that this creature can burrow underground surprisingly quickly to attack prey from below, or simply to warm itself in the dirt, but this is something I've yet to observe it doing since it reawakened. A part of me is intrigued by the possibility of seeing this creature in combat with another of equal strength. But I must be careful what I wish for, as one of the creatures that has awakened has me concerned about the risks of others like it lurking out from the darker depths of my world's past. The time finally came for me to use my favorite, or maybe second favorite, Godzilla monster and turn it into a dragon. I kind of flip-flop nowadays between either Anguirus and Destroyah being my favorite Godzilla monsters, but it's probably still Anguirus. And something I knew I had to do for this drawing is approach the pose differently, because very rarely on a drawing, or of a creature, dragon, whatever, am I trying to emphasize the back of the creature. But with Anguirus, the most interesting thing about him, design-wise, is his back. He's got a really spiky turtle back that I think in some cases actually can sort of split off into wings, so I don't know if he ever has really used that in any significant way. I think he uses it in his first appearance. I don't totally remember. But anyway, so I thought about putting more spikes on the wings, but I think I like the balance that I ended up going with here, and this pose isn't one I've really used before. I was actually kind of pulling inspiration from my Nidoking Godzilla drawing from Pokemon as Godzilla Monsters Part 1, because I was like, I think that's the most back I've shown of any creature in a drawing. And that might not even necessarily be true, but with this I kind of emphasized it even more, that I'm having him kind of swooping up, flying into the air. His wings are flared out so we can get a good look at both of those, and his back is kind of the main thing in the image, but also kind of rounds us up to his head. And then sort of last minute, as I was rendering his head, I also added Anguirus's shriek, because he has like a shriek sort of attack, and I think it looks exactly like how it looks in I forget which video game it was, but the first Godzilla video game I ever played back on original Xbox that first introduced me to Anguirus. So that was a nice little addition that I hadn't planned that I think looks pretty cool. And so I think this pose works well. I think it makes it maybe my favorite drawing of the episode, even though he's a simpler looking dragon, just because it's something new and different pose-wise for me. And of course, you know, he's my favorite Godzilla monster. But I had also not planned on making this guy a wyvern, even though I've said many times that's my favorite kind of dragon. But once I drew his wings in, I realized that if he does have another set of arms, they'd be so obscured that we wouldn't be able to see them anyway, so there's no point in drawing them in there. So I just went, whatever, canonically making this guy a wyvern. And I hope you all like this one as much as I do. Let's take a look. Oh, by the way, all of these will be up as posters on my Teespring store. I'm not going to do the, mid-video ad break thing. If you want them, the posters will be linked in the description. Quick heads up before we get into the lore, I did this drawing twice, and I like the second one much more, but I'm showing both of them in here. And also I wrote the lore for the Skar King before I saw the movie last night, because I wanted to make sure there were no spoilers for anyone that didn't get to see it when this video came out. Okay, now off to Tayran with the lore. As I mentioned previously, most of the creatures to emerge have been docile towards humans, but there is an exception. One of the creatures to come forth may have some scattered mentions in the legends of Godzilla and the Reptilian King, but it seems certain that it is of the same species as the king, and may not approve of the fact that that beast holds such a name. You see, this beast, which I now refer to as the Reptilian Whipslash, appears much like an orange-furred version of the Reptilian, and began slaughtering the most powerful dragons and beasts in the territory near where the Reptilian King had last been seen. It seems clear now that it was attempting to lure out the Reptilian King for a battle, and in spite of the legendary strength and cunning of the king, the Whipslash apparently had the upper hand for much of this fight. It is leaner, faster, has longer wings, and, most notably, it has a bony whip-like tail, at the end of which is a glowing blue blade. It was able to maneuver this appendage with astounding accuracy, and practically cut the Reptilian to pieces with it, causing major damage to the king's arm. The Reptilian King apparently wound up retreating from this fight, but I doubt the Whipslash will allow it to flee for long, as this new monstrosity seems as though it is out to kill the king, making that very title essentially its for the taking. Though I do wonder and hope if the Reptilian King did deem it necessary to retreat from this fight, is there a chance it will now seek out its old ally and show my world that once again Godzilla has arisen to help the king defeat this new threat? Alright, so this was one of those rare cases where I disliked a drawing enough that I felt I had to redo it. And that the reason I was a little bit down on this video was because the first drawing I did was the Skar King as a dragon, and I just didn't like how this version turned out. I mean, here's the finished version of the first drawing, and it's like, it's serviceable, like it's okay, but I was like, first of all, it doesn't look enough like a dragon to me. I don't like the shape of the wings, I don't like the pose. I wanted it to kind of work as a companion piece to my Kong dragon drawing, but then I ended up setting it at night, and I just, so many things about it, I was just like, this is really putting a damper on the episode for me. And last night, as I was, usually I have my videos done at least 2 days in advance, and this one I'm finishing it the morning that it's coming out, and I was like, okay, if I'm really considering redoing this drawing, I should keep in mind that 1, it's not likely to make the video do that much better, and 2, it's going to put me behind on working on Monday's video, The Death of Benny Sharp, and that means I'm going to have to do work this weekend. With those things in mind, is it still worth it for me to take another 4 hours to do a new version of this drawing? And I still went a resounding yes. I really wanted to do a really good version of the Skar King, especially after I saw the movie last night. So I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's redo it. And I'm so glad I did. I like the shape of the head so much more. I like the pose so much more. I made the background completely set as a pairing for the Kong dragon, so that if someone, originally that Kong dragon was paired with a Godzilla dragon on the other side, but now if someone wanted to have Godzilla, or wanted to have Kong and Skar King as their pairing, you could do that instead. And I also said going into this one, okay, my favorite drawing from this episode is probably Anguirus so far, and that was the simplest design, and my Kong dragon is one of my simplest dragons of the last few years as well, and it's also one of my favorites. So let's not go over the top with this. And let's also fix the bones on the tail, because I thought they looked janky and weird. The shape I went with was just kind of in the last one. In this one, I still went kind of more simple than a bone tail actually would be, but I think this works a lot better. And overall, just the pose on this one, like I said, the head, everything about this one, I really like better than the first version. And I hope you're all jazzed about it as well, so let's take a look. Thank you so much for watching this compilation, everybody, and if you enjoyed the art and the storytelling in this, I highly recommend checking out either the Summoner's Beasts or Mytholethal. Both are currently running storylines with 5 or more episodes that have tons of awesome monster art in them, and Tayrin is the main character of the Summoner's Beasts. I'll have both those playlists linked in the description, but besides that, I'll see you when I'm back from my meditation retreat. Love you all and goodbye.